In January of 2019, WeWork was worth $47 billion. It rented empty office buildings. It filled them with free beer, neon signs, and beanbag chairs. And it called itself a technology company. The most powerful investor on earth believed it. He handed its founder more than $10 billion. 8 months later, that same company tried to sell shares to the public, and the public read the fine print. In 6 weeks, $47 billion became less than 8. The founder was pushed out, and the fastest rising startup of its generation became one of the fastest falls in modern business history. Today, WeWork goes on the table, because what killed it wasn't the office market. It wasn't a recession. It was a single document, the one they were legally required to publish. Let's begin the autopsy. To understand how a company that rented desks convinced Wall Street it was worth more than Ford and General Motors combined, you have to go back to 2010, to a single floor in downtown Manhattan. The idea was simple, almost boring. Rent a large office space on a long lease. Cut it up into smaller desks and glass offices. Rent those out, month to month, for more than you paid. Add coffee, fast internet, and a community manager. That was WeWork. 2 men built it. Adam Neumann, a tall, charismatic Israeli-born entrepreneur who had already failed at selling baby clothes with knee pads, and Miguel McKelvey, a quiet architect raised in an Oregon commune. Together, they opened their first WeWork in Soho, New York. But Neumann was never selling office space. He was selling a feeling. He told people WeWork existed to elevate the world's consciousness. He talked about ending loneliness. He talked about capitalism with a soul. Where a landlord saw square footage, Adam Neumann saw a movement, and the timing was perfect. After the 2008 crash, a generation of young workers wanted freedom, flexibility, and a place that didn't feel like their parents' cubicle. WeWork gave it to them. The neon signs on the wall said, "Do what you love." The beer taps flowed. It worked. WeWork grew fast. Then it grew insane. New York, London, Tel Aviv, Shanghai. By 2018, it was one of the largest private office tenants in Manhattan, London, and Washington. Hundreds of locations across dozens of countries, and hundreds of thousands of members paying to sit at its desks. Neumann stopped calling it an office company. He called it a physical social network. And he didn't stop at offices. WeWork launched WeLive, apartments where strangers would live together like one big dorm. It launched WeGrow, an actual private elementary school run by Neumann's wife. It bought a company that made artificial wave pools. It threw a company-wide festival called Summer Camp, flying thousands of employees to the English countryside for days of music, drinking, and speeches about changing the world. The message was always the same. This was not a business. This was a way of life. In 2018, all of it pulled in $1.8 billion in revenue. That was a real, enormous number. But revenue was never the point. The valuation was. And the valuation came from one man. Masayoshi Son, the founder of Japanese giant SoftBank, ran the largest technology fund in history, a $100 billion war chest. The story goes that Son toured a WeWork office for just 12 minutes, then invited Neumann into his car and offered him $4.4 billion. He reportedly told Neumann that in a fight, the smart guy doesn't always win, the crazy guy does. And he told him to make WeWork bigger and crazier. Neumann listened. SoftBank kept writing checks. By January of 2019, SoftBank had poured more than $10 billion into WeWork and set its private valuation at $47 billion. On paper, a 9-year-old company that rented office space was now one of the most valuable startups on the planet. Neumann became a paper billionaire. He was surrounded by the trappings of a rock star, tequila shots in the office, barefoot walks through headquarters, a private jet. He talked about becoming the world's first trillionaire, about living forever, about becoming president of the world. And almost nobody in his orbit told him to slow down, because when your company gains $1 billion in value every few weeks, who's going to argue? Before we cut this one, open any further, subscribe, and hit the bell. Because on this channel, no fortune is too big to end up on the table. And trust me, the cause of death is never what you'd guess. Here is the crack that everything else grew out of. WeWork was not a technology company. It was a real estate company wearing a technology costume. Look at how it actually made money. WeWork signed leases on buildings that lasted 15 or 20 years. long-term promises to pay landlords, no matter what. Then it rented those desks to freelancers and startups on deals that could be canceled in a month. Long-term costs. Short-term income. In a good economy, that gap is a business. In a downturn, that gap is a trap. The tenants leave in a month. The rent bills stay for 20 years. And the numbers underneath the dream were brutal. In 2018, WeWork made $1.8 billion in revenue and lost almost the same amount. For years, the pattern held. For roughly every dollar that came in, about $1 went out the door behind it. WeWork was not a machine that printed money. It was a machine that burned it, beautifully. Picture one building to see the trap. WeWork signs a 20-year lease on an empty floor in a glass tower. It spends millions ripping it out the glass walls, the reclaimed wood, the neon, the free kombucha on tap. Then it fills the desks with startups on month-to-month deals. As long as the economy is booming and the desks stay full, money flows. But the day those startups get nervous and cancel, the desks empty in weeks. And WeWork is still on the hook for 18 more years of rent on a floor nobody is sitting in. Multiply that by hundreds of buildings around the world. That was the machine. And instead of fixing the machine, WeWork kept feeding it. It spent to grow at any cost, a strategy Silicon Valley loved to call blitzscaling. It bought a marketing company. It bought Meetup, the events platform. It bought an office services startup. Every acquisition added more expense, more complexity, more cash out the door, all justified by the belief that scale itself would one day turn into profit. The growth was real. The profit never came. So how do you sell that story to investors? You invent a new way to measure it. In its own filings, WeWork leaned on a metric it called community-adjusted EBITDA. Now, normal adjusted profit already strips out interest, taxes, and wear on equipment. WeWork went further. It also stripped out the cost of marketing and administration, and even the basic cost of building out and running its offices, the actual business. Strip away enough expenses, and a company that loses billions can be made to look like it's almost in the black. Wall Street had a simpler name for it. They called it fiction. For years, none of this mattered, because WeWork was private. Private companies can dream. They only answer to a handful of investors who already believe. But in 2019, Neumann wanted more money. And the biggest pool of money in the world sits in the public stock market. To reach it, WeWork had to do the one thing it had never done. It had to open its books to everyone. On August 14, 2019, WeWork's parent company filed its S-1, the official document a company must publish before going public. It was supposed to be a victory lap. Instead, it was a confession. Reporters, analysts, and investors read all of it. And what they found went far beyond the losses. The filing revealed that Adam Neumann had personally bought stakes in buildings and then leased those same buildings back to WeWork, collecting rent from his own company. It revealed that WeWork had paid Neumann nearly $6 million for the rights to the trademark We, after the company decided to rebrand around that single word. He was, in effect, selling the word we back to his own business. It got stranger. Neumann held a special class of stock that gave him 20 votes for every one vote of a normal shareholder. 20 to 1. That meant that even after selling most of the company, he could not be overruled and could not be fired. The filing also described a plan in which his wife, Rebecca, a co-founder, would help choose his successor if he died keeping control inside the family. Investors were being asked to hand over billions and given almost no power over how it was spent. And around the filing swirled stories about the culture at the top. Reports of tequila-soaked meetings. Reports that on one flight on a private jet, staff found marijuana on board, and the spooked owners recalled the plane mid-trip. Reports that Neumann had borrowed against his own WeWork shares to fund his lifestyle while the company bled cash. Each story on its own was a raised eyebrow. Together, they painted a picture of a founder treating a $47 billion company like a personal kingdom. One thing before we go deeper, if this autopsy's got you hooked, hit the like button. It's how YouTube decides whose fortune ends up on the table next. And here's the question to sit with. If you'd been offered shares in this company, would you have spotted the warning sign in time? Tell me in the comments, because what happens next took just 42 days and almost nobody saw it coming. For 9 years, WeWork's valuation only moved in one direction, up. It had never been tested by a real market. It had only ever been priced by one true believer with a checkbook. The stock market was not a believer. It was a room full of people whose entire job is to say no. Within days of the S1 landing, the mood turned. The $47 billion figure became a punchline. Bankers who were supposed to sell the offering quietly started slashing the number. 25 billion, then 20, then whispers of 10 billion or less. Every day the company was worth less, not because anything inside it had changed, but because for the first time, outsiders were allowed to look. WeWork panicked and tried to fix in weeks what it had built over years. Neumann returned the nearly $6 million he'd taken for the We trademark. The company cut his 20-to-1 voting power down to 10-to-1. It removed his wife's role in choosing a successor. But it was too late. You cannot unring that bell. The document was already public, and the trust was already gone. On September 17, 2019, WeWork announced it was postponing the IPO. The victory lap was canceled. The pressure now turned on the man himself. The same investors who had once been hypnotized by Adam Neumann now saw him as the single biggest problem. His board, including his old champion, SoftBank, turned against him. On September 24th, just 6 weeks after the filing that was supposed to crown him, Adam Neumann resigned as chief executive of the company he had built. On September 30th, WeWork formally withdrew the S1. The IPO was dead. But a company that burns billions a year cannot simply stop. Without the public money it had counted on, WeWork was weeks away from running out of cash entirely. It needed a rescue. And only one man was deep enough in to pay for it. On October 23, 2019, SoftBank agreed to take control in a deal that valued WeWork at under $8 billion, from $47 billion to under $8, a collapse of more than 80% in about 6 weeks. And Adam Neumann, for being pushed out of his own imploding company, he negotiated an exit package reported to be worth as much as $1.7 billion, including money for his shares, a consulting fee, and credit to repay his loans. The man whose decisions helped detonate the company walked away richer than almost anyone he left behind. The people who believed in the mission were not so lucky. In the months that followed, WeWork laid off thousands of employees. Many of them held stock options, the little slice of ownership that was supposed to make the long hours worth it. Those options were now worth a fraction of what they had dreamed, and for plenty of people, worth nothing at all. The Wavepool company was sold off. WeGrow, the school, was shut down. The summer camp festival became a memory. The consciousness never got elevated. The bill just came due. The story didn't end there, and it didn't get prettier. WeWork limped on. It finally went public in 2021, not through a triumphant IPO, but through a side door, at a fraction of that mythical $47 billion price. And in November of 2023, the company that once claimed it would change how the world worked filed for bankruptcy. The autopsy had simply taken a few more years to finish. So what actually killed WeWork? The official cause of death was a failed IPO, but that's just what showed up on the surface. The real cause of death was sunlight. For 9 years, WeWork lived in the dark, where one believer's imagination set the price. The moment it stepped into public view and had to show its real numbers, the story couldn't survive contact with a balance sheet. And this collapse was flashing warning signs the whole way down. Watch for them, because they never really go out of style. The first flag was a company inventing its own scoreboard. When a business has to create a brand new metric like community-adjusted EBITDA to make its losses disappear, the metric isn't the innovation. The losses are the truth. The second flag was a founder no one could say no to. 20 votes to 1. Buildings leased back to himself. A successor clause for the family. When one person cannot be checked, cannot be fired, and cannot be questioned, you are not investing in a company. You are betting on a mood. The third flag was a valuation set by one buyer, not a market. $47 billion was never a fact. It was one man's opinion, repeated until everyone treated it as real. A price only one person will pay is not a price. It's a dare. And here's the uncomfortable part. These flags never disappear. Every few years, a new company arrives wrapped in a mission, run by a founder who can do no wrong, valued by a handful of insiders far above what it earns. The costume changes. The autopsy rarely does. So here's my question for you. Which of these 3 red flags, the invented metric, the untouchable founder, or the one buyer valuation, have you spotted in a company people still trust today? Drop it in the comments. I read them. That's this. Autopsy. Closed. The next fortune on the slab is already on your screen, And if you want to be in the room when it happens, subscribe. New autopsy every week, here at Money Autopsy, where fortunes come to die.